the ANC is to act on its own decisions. Because just recently they reaffirmed their earlier decisions that those who are in and out of court who are charged should step down. And of course, they are finalizing some of the guidelines that direct what happens when people step down. However, those guidelines, Michelle, and this is very important, have already been adopted. They've been approved, they are adopted, so they are official guidelines of the ANC. So there is no question about whether or not people should comply with them. So in this case, Ace Magashule should be stepping down because they said there is no need for people to await finalizations of those guidelines. They must step down in the process. And in fact, the ANC Eastern Cape has led by example in this case. They have suspended Ms. Gomba, the MEC for Health, who is accused in the theft of funeral money for Nelson Mandela. So there is already a precedent in this case that should be followed by everybody in a similar situation as Ms. Gomba of the Eastern Cape.
So how courageous is the ANC, you're saying? Can we also ask the question then, how courageous is the president?
Well, the president acts in concert with his NEC. What we know is that not everybody in the NEC is behind acting against impropriety, because quite a number of them are implicated in corruption. So inevitably, you will have some resistance. They will try to mischaracterize, misinterpret resolutions that are taken by the majority, or at least by some of them. But what is encouraging in this case is that they have adopted these guidelines. There is no opposition to them. Unfortunately, we don't know the content. And so the real test, really, Michelle, will come once these guidelines are now finalized. And the NEC will have to say, okay, here is the final package. Everybody implicated must step down. At that point, then I think that would be the crunch time to determine whether these corrupt individuals or implicated individuals respect the authority of the ANC, because this is about the legitimacy of the ANC. All members of the ANC are meant to abide by decisions of the ANC. And so if the NEC says we have finalized the guidelines, step down, and if they don't, it then means that they don't recognize the authority of the NEC. It then becomes a serious problem because it's a crisis. You cannot have members who don't recognize the legitimacy of your own decisions and yet claim to be members, in which case they might have to be acted upon, disciplined, kicked out, something like that.
I mean, it's a sentence you've just sort of said in passing, Dr. Ndletyana, you know, that not everyone is on the same page when it comes to the stand-aside resolution, because so many of them are implicated in corruption. I mean, that's a shocking statement to make. Given what you've just said, can we still talk about any form of integrity when we talk about the governing party?
It's not shocking, actually, Michelle. I think if you listen from what has been coming out of the Zondo Commission, corruption has been institutionalized in the ANC. It became culture of the ANC. If you didn't steal, then you were an idiot. And to a point where members who were morally upright were kicked out. I mean, their DGs were kicked out because they wouldn't comply with instructions to siphon money. So most of those, or some of those were brought in were people who were willing to play along, to grant favors, to engage in this corruption. So corruption became institutionalized. It then meant that it created a network of beneficiaries. It became an economy of its own. So it then became difficult to find people who have not done anything wrong. And that's where the resistance against corruption lies, is that almost everybody knows someone who is corrupt. And now they are saying, why me? Why didn't you act against other individuals earlier on? Why are you only acting now? That is the problem, because corruption has been so embedded within the party. And now it becomes difficult because you have beneficiaries, quite a lot of them. So you have to act. Unfortunately, you have to make example of certain individuals. But what is important here, though, also, Michelle, is that the ANC may have its own crisis of morality. But what is encouraging here is that state institutions are acting. That's what is important, because there was a time when they were not acting. And what is even more encouraging, in the instance of the Eastern Cape, the funeral fraud money, that case was withdrawn at some point about 2 or so years ago. Shamila Patoi was quite surprised, and as many of us were, but that meant there were people in the NPA who withdrew it. There were bad apples within. And she insisted that the case should be reinstated. It has been reinstated, but we need to know who are these people, because we rely on the NPA to pursue these cases. So we need a higher degree of certainty that the NPA is completely clean. But the Ace Magashule case, we're encouraged, it is going ahead. There doesn't seem to be any shenanigans so far.
Listen, even the Hardidars in your garden have gone quiet. They're so shocked by the situation you've described in the governing party about, this corruption that is institutionalized and so endemic. I just think about the State Capture Inquiry and Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo, how he described with such shock and surprise the levels of corruption, the amounts of money that have been siphoned off in one way or another. Let's just shift tack for a moment and talk about the former president's appearance at the State Capture Inquiry that was scheduled for Monday. He says he will not be attending the hearings at the State Capture Inquiry because of Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo himself. Then we look at Bheki Cele's visit to Nkandla yesterday. So his spokesperson, Leranzo Themba, releases a statement to say that Bheki Cele will first report back to the ANC before any of us get to know what the content of that meeting was yesterday. How do we read that meeting yesterday and the confusion around whether Bheki Cele was there as police minister or as ANC NEC member?
I think if there's any concern that Jacob Zuma's arrest might create a little bit of unrest and some violence, obviously there should be every attempt made to prevent that from happening. So they can try to have informal chats, whatever the case is, to prevent that violence from happening. That's one point. But on the other side, you have law enforcement agencies that have a responsibility to execute. Once Judge Zondo initiated the process going to the Constitutional Court, and indeed the court comes back saying he must be arrested, we expect the police to act. So for now, we need not worry about Cele's movements, what he does, this and that. That's well and good. But once a formal decision is taken by the Constitutional Court that he must go to prison, we expect the law enforcement to act. If they do not act, then that is a problem. That's when we will need to worry. But for now, we need not worry.
Dr. Ndletyana, you and I could go on for the better part of this morning discussing the political landscape in the country. Let's leave it there for now. Dr. Mcebisi Ndletyana is a political analyst, of course, as we continue to track the big story of the day, ANC Secretary